Welcome to our webinar, The Culture Architect, which is actually the third in a series that we're doing all around leading the human-centric organisation. Before we actually get into the body of the webinar today, just want you to pause for a moment, maybe pause the recording and just ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is you can't really take a lunch break without, the whole world collapsing, your phone blowing up. And 10 is where the team could actually thrive for a week without you. And I want you to answer the question and thinking about that scale of 1 to 10. How much of a bottleneck are you currently? As I say, if you'd just like to pause the recording there. My next question is, which of these unwritten rules is currently slowing down your team the most? The always on expectation that as an email lands, there's an expectation that there will be an instant reply. The meeting bloat, where everything needs a call, a Zoom call, a meeting. The approval loop, where everything has to go across the leader's desk. And the information hoard, where it's really hard to find the information that team members need. And again, just pause the recording for a moment just to have a think about that. Which of those is actually currently slowing your team down the most? We're currently living through a fundamental shift in what I call the physics of work. For decades, leadership was about oversight, the manager as the monitor. But in 2026, with the acceleration of AI, the decentralisation of teams, that model has become a massive liability. Today isn't about managing people in the traditional sense, it's about systems design. And we're moving from being the hub of every decision to becoming the architect of the environment. Because the truth is, your team's performance isn't just a result of their talent. It's a result of the operating system, the environment you have built for them to work within. Most managers are the hub. Everything goes through them. Everything goes across their desk. And this creates that bottleneck. A culture architect, however, designs a system where psychological safety, accountability, and innovation happen by default. They're part of the DNA of the team. And today we're going to look at that blueprint for that system. For those of you who perhaps don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan, and I'm the founding partner and creator of the Jigsaw Discovery Tool. I started my career a very long time ago now in the hospitality sector, working initially in operations and then moving into quite senior leadership positions before moving into learning and development some 26 years ago now. I've got a degree in psychology, and for the last 16 years, I've been a student of neuroscience, following and studying the latest research and looking at what we can actually learn and apply to the world of work. To understand where we are going today, we'll look at where we've been. This series has been a journey through the 3 core requirements of a human-centric business. In part 1, we focused on time. We looked at the leader as the architect of focus. You cannot lead a human-centric team if you're constantly drowning in tactical firefighting. So we looked at how we can reclaim the leader's time so that they actually had the time to lead. In part 2, we looked at trust. We discussed the empathy engine. We used the Jigsaw discovery tool framework to understand how to recharge the team's connection and build strong, trusting relationships that are needed to sustain high performance. And now we're going to focus the final piece of the puzzle, what we call the culture architect. Think of part 1 and part 2 as the foundation and the materials, and part 3 is the structure itself. In this session, we're going to do a dive into the team operating system. We'll move beyond the feeling of culture and into the mechanics of culture. We're going to talk about communication protocols, decision-making rights, and how to build a failing loudly framework that turns errors into team intelligence. By the end of this webinar, you won't just have a new set of leadership tips. You'll have a roadmap to transition from being the person who solves every problem to the person who designs the environment where problems are solved before they need the leader's input. As usual, we'll be breaking the webinar up into 4 chapters. In chapter 1, we'll look at the 4 components of a human-centric operating system: communication, decision-making, conflict resolution, recovery, and rest. In chapter 2, it's about moving beyond that feeling of safety and why failing loudly is a biological necessity for innovation. In chapter 3, we'll look at the skills for the architect, 10 things they can stop doing and 10 things they can start doing. So chapter 1, the team operating system. In the first 2 parts of this series, we spoke about your time and your team's trust. But how do we make those things permanent? We do it by building a team operating system, a team OS. Think about your phone for a second. You have the hardware. That's your office. Your laptops, your people, and you have the apps. Those are the tasks that you do every day. But the operating system is what determines how those apps talk to each other, how much battery is consumed, and what happens when the system crashes. Most teams are running on a default operating system, a collection of habits, accidents, and unwritten rules. As a culture architect, your job is to move from the default operating system to a designed and intentional operating system. A robust team operating system is built on 4 critical pillars, and if one is missing, the system can glitch. Pillar 1 is communication protocols. In a human-centric organisation, we must distinguish between synchronous and asynchronous work. Default culture assumes everything is urgent, leading to instant reply anxiety. A designed, intentional operating system clarifies that we use Slack for non-urgent updates, and we only call if the building is metaphorically on fire. This protocol protects your team's most valuable asset, their focus and the brain's capacity. Pillar 2 is decision-making rights. Who is allowed to say yes? If every decision requires the manager's signature, you haven't built an empowered, high-performing team. The architect designs decision guardrails, boundaries, clear frameworks that tell the team under, say, £500, you decide. Over £500, we consult. You are therefore hard coding autonomy into the system. Autonomy being one of the top motivating social domains, according to research carried out by the Leadership Institute and a review of their SCARF model, which was published at the end of 2025. The third pillar is conflict resolution. Friction is inevitable. It's actually to be actively encouraged in high-performing teams. The glitch happens when friction turns into resentment. A culture architect builds a system for healthy conflict. This means having a formal way to disagree, a disagree and commit protocol, so that the friction leads to fire, not smoke. And finally, pillar 4, recovery and rest. In a world of burnout, rest cannot be a reward for finishing work, because work is never finished. A human-centric operating system builds recovery into the schedule, whether that's a no meeting Wednesday or a digital sunset policy. The architect ensures that people don't burn out. If you look at the diagram on the left, we have the leaders or the leader-led team. The leader is the battery. If the leader stops, the team stops. And on the right, we have the system-led team. The operating system is the battery. The leader's role shifts from providing the energy to ensuring the system is optimized. Again, you might want to pause the recording there and just have a look and see where you actually fit on there. Are you leader-led or system-led in your team? Let's just take a few minutes to think about your weakest structural link. Imagine you're suddenly called out of the office for 3 days on an important client project. One of your team's busiest times. Now, you've actually had no prior notification, so you've had no time to prepare. And I'm going to ask 4 questions, and I want you to mark down yes or no to each of these questions. Will your team know which tasks to prioritise without asking you for a quick steer via Slack or the phone? Is there a project or spend currently on your desk that will completely stall because only you have the authority to sign it off? If a disagreement breaks out between 2 key players while you're gone, is there a known process for them to resolve it? Or will they wait until you're back to mediate? And will your team feel guilty for taking their planned lunch breaks or finishing on time because you aren't there to model the permission to rest? So look at your no answers. Which of the pillars is the most fragile? Just write down the word comms, decisions, conflict, or reset, because this is your architect's punch list. If you answered no to any of these, it's not because your system isn't capable. It's because the system is missing a piece of code. A human-centric leader doesn't work harder to fill that gap. They design a protocol so the gap no longer exists. So now we're going to look at how we hard code that autonomy. So we've looked at the architectural blueprint of the team operating system, but even the best designed house will fail if the foundation is sinking. In a human-centric organisation, that foundation is psychological safety. Psychological safety isn't a soft HR concept. It's a hard physiological requirement for high performance. Now, I want to move away from the management buzzwords and actually take a look at the biology. Every single person on your team has a highly efficient survival network. And its only job is to scan the environment for threats. To keep us safe is its primary task. In the modern workplace, threats aren't saber-toothed tigers. They're social threats, the fear of looking stupid, the fear of being blamed, or the fear of being the messenger who gets shot. When a team member feels a social threat, their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for that creativity, logical thinking, problem solving, literally shuts down. So you were paying for a high level strategist, let's say, but because of the environment, you're only getting a fight or flight survivor. If you're a regular attendee at our webinars, you'll have heard me speak many times on the brain's primary function to keep us safe, which it does by constantly scanning the environment, receiving up to 11,000 pieces of information per second, which it categorises as a potential threat or a potential reward, something which we will want or will enjoy. It would be good for us. So when safety is low, people hide or hold back information. They don't own up to mistakes. They stop sharing innovative ideas that feel a bit risky. And they hide when they're struggling. For a culture architect, this is an absolute disaster. You cannot optimize a system if the data coming into it is false or incomplete. As an architect, you don't just ask for honesty, you design it. And this brings me to a concept called failing loudly. Most organizations fail quietly. A mistake happens. Someone feels shame, scared. They fix it in the dark in the hope that nobody will find out. And the rest of the team actually learns nothing. The mistake is therefore destined to happen again. The culture architect implements a failing loudly framework. And this is a ritualized process where mistakes are treated as system data rather than personal failure. So here's how the architect handles an error. They depersonalize it. We don't ask who did this. We ask which part of the operating system allowed this to happen. They review the protocol. Was the decision-making framework unclear? Was the communication protocol broken? And then they broadcast the learning. They share the error and the new system update with the whole team. By failing loudly, you signal to the amygdala within our brain that it's safe to be honest. We're giving people that permission to feel safe, to own up to mistakes, to discuss the error. And you're literally turning off their threat response so their innovation response can turn back on. And they maintain the use of their best logical and creative problem-solving thinking skills. So just want you to think about being an architect for a moment and think about the last significant mistake that happened in your team, in your department. Not asking you to name names, but just make a note and think, note down, was it loud? Did the whole team learn from the mistake? Was the system updated? Or was it kept quiet? It was dealt with behind closed doors, and there's still that risk that it could happen again. So we've established the biological foundation. We know that a brain in threat mode cannot innovate. And we've seen through the loud and quiet examples that most of us have data leaks in our culture where valuable lessons are being lost. But even a team that feels safe can still be incredibly unproductive. Why? Because psychological safety gives people the permission to work, but it doesn't necessarily give them the space to work. You can have the most empowered, high-trust team in the world, but if they are being interrupted every 6 minutes by a quick question or an urgent notification, their cognitive energy is being drained by the environment the leader has built. So if we turn to chapter 3 now. As a culture architect, your final task isn't just to manage the people, it's to manage the ecosystem around them. We've reclaimed your time. We've secured their trust. Now we need to design the physical and digital space where that trust turns into output. And that brings us to our final chapter 3, transitioning to the environment designer. We're going to look at the hard skills of an architect, how to audit a calendar, how to kill interruption culture, and how to implement asynchronous leadership rituals that respect the human brain's need for deep work. So let's look at how we move from being the hero who solves the problems to the designer who creates the environments where those problems never actually start. In the old model of leadership, accessibility was a badge of honour. We take pride in our open door policy. But as a culture architect, you realise that an open door is often a sign of a broken system. If your team has to walk through your door 10 times a day to get their work done, the environment is failing them. Every time a team member is interrupted by a quick ping or an urgent meeting that could have been an email, they pay a cognitive tax. It takes an average of 23 minutes to refocus after a distraction. If your team is paying that tax 5 times a day, they aren't really working. They're just context switching until they burn out. So your job as an architect is to lower that tax. You are the protector of deep work. So again, you may want to just pause the recording for a moment and ask yourself, what could you implement to protect deep work? Could you perhaps introduce no meeting zones, digital sunsets, quiet spaces, home working? The most powerful tool in the architect's kit is the asynchronous leadership. Most managers lead through presence. They talk, they hover, they sync up. The architect leads through clarity and documentation. Instead of a 30-minute status update meeting, the architect implements a Friday digest protocol or a shared project board. Instead of a quick call to explain a task, the architect records a 2-minute video or writes a clear brief. Why? Because documentation scales, but your time doesn't. When you lead asynchronously, you give your team the gift of autonomy over their attention. They can consume your leadership when they're in a shallow work state, leaving their high energy hours for the tasks that actually move the needle on performance. Interestingly enough, most meetings take place in the morning, 10 till 11:30, in an afternoon, 2 till 3:30, 4 o'clock, both of which are times when, for the majority of people, we're in the best mind state to do our best focused work. Yet we're taken out to meetings. To move into the role of architect, you must perform a system audit. So I want you to look at your calendar for next week and ask 3 architectural questions. Does this meeting exist because a process is broken? For example, we meet because the spreadsheet is never updated. Am I the only one who can make this decision? If that's a yes, why haven't I designed a framework so they can do it for themselves? And is this a sync or a connection? We keep meetings that build relationships, the human-centric stuff, but we automate the meetings that just move data. You're shifting from being the hero who saves the day to the designer who ensures that the day doesn't need saving. So let's be ruthless for a second. Look at your calendar for tomorrow. If you had to delegate one reoccurring meeting to give your team 4 hours of deep work time back, which one would it be? Is it the weekly update, the ad hoc sync, or the project review? Which meeting is the biggest tax on your collective energy? Remember, the architect doesn't rebuild a house in a day. They start with just one blueprint change. And before we move to the final wrap, I just want you to commit to one environment design change. Maybe it's a no meeting Friday morning. Maybe it's a Slack-free hour. Whatever it is, write it down. Because you aren't just a manager anymore. You're now the designer of the most productive space your team has ever worked in. So as we draw this session to a close and this series, I want you to take a breath and look back at the journey we've taken together. In part 1, we reclaimed your time. We acknowledged that you cannot lead from the trenches. In part 2, we recharged your team's trust. We looked at the empathy engine and how to connect as humans first. And today, in part 3, we've built the structure. We've moved from being a manager who does to an architect who designs. You now have the blueprint for an organisation where people just don't show up. They thrive, they innovate, and they own their outcomes. Because the environment you build or built has allowed them to do that. I know we've covered a lot. The team operating system, failing loudly, asynchronous leadership. It can feel like there's an awful lot to build. But as I said, remember, an architect doesn't lay every brick at once. They start with one line on a blueprint. So before you log off and dive back into your inbox, I want you to identify your 1-inch action, your one line on the blueprint. Maybe it's deleting that one redundant meeting we talked about. Maybe it's writing down one decision-making framework so your team doesn't have to ask for permission. Or maybe it's simply going to your team and saying, I want to help you protect your deep work. How can I start? And on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us on our journey to leading the human-centric organisations. The recordings will all be available on YouTube. And as always, please feel free to contact me at any time. You can always get us on the Jigsaw Discovery Tool website. Go to our contact page and you will find the information there to get in touch. Thank you.